Robert Johnson was reading Charlotte's Web to his second graders when Principal Martinez burst in with tears in her eyes. "3 children are missing from Lincoln Elementary," she whispered. The book fell from Robert's hands, and for the first time in 8 years, he wasn't thinking like a teacher. He was thinking like the military intelligence officer who'd specialized in finding people who didn't want to be found. Welcome to Hidden Hero Stories. Before we begin this intense story of hidden expertise and life-saving intelligence, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from today, and if stories like this deserve to be told. Hit that subscribe button. Robert Johnson had been teaching at Riverside Elementary for 8 years. At 42, he was the kind of teacher parents requested for their children: patient, creative, and genuinely caring. His classroom walls were covered with colorful learning posters, student artwork, and motivational quotes about reaching for dreams. What his colleagues didn't know was that before he taught children to read, Robert had spent 12 years reading classified intelligence reports, tracking terrorist cells, and locating high-value targets across Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. Master Sergeant Robert Johnson, military intelligence analyst, had been one of the Army's most effective human intelligence specialists. "Mr. Johnson," said Principal Martinez, trying to compose herself, "I need to dismiss your class early. Something terrible has happened at Lincoln Elementary." Robert's training kicked in immediately. His mind automatically shifted to threat assessment mode A, a cognitive switch he hadn't experienced in years. "What kind of situation, Principal Martinez?" 3 children were taken from their school playground during recess. Emma Rodriguez, 7 years old. Marcus Thompson, 8. Sophia Chen, 6. The FBI is setting up a command center, but the book of Charlotte's Web lay forgotten on the classroom floor as Robert's world narrowed to tactical focus. 3 children, daylight abduction. Multiple targets suggested organized operation, not random crime. "Students," Robert said, his voice taking on an authority that surprised his second graders, "we're going to have early dismissal today. Please line up quietly for Mrs. Patterson." As his students filed out, Robert's mind was already working differently. 12 years of military intelligence training doesn't simply disappear because you start teaching multiplication tables. Pattern recognition, threat analysis, human behavior assessment. These skills had been dormant, not destroyed. "Robert," Principal Martinez said once the children were gone, "I know this is terrible, but there's nothing we can do except pray the police find them." "Where exactly were they taken from?" Robert asked, his tone clinical rather than emotional. "Lincoln Elementary's North Playground, during afternoon recess, around 2:15 p.m. Robert glanced at his watch. 3:30 p.m., 1 hour and 15 minutes. In military intelligence, the first 4 hours were critical for any recovery operation. After that, the probability of successful rescue dropped exponentially. "Principal Martinez, I need to make a phone call. Can you handle my after-school duties?" She nodded, confused by his sudden urgency and unfamiliar tone of authority. Robert drove to Lincoln Elementary, parking 3 blocks away. His approach was methodical: observe without being observed, gather intelligence before revealing presence. These were habits from a different life, but they felt as natural as breathing. The scene was controlled chaos. Police cars, FBI vehicles, news vans, and desperate parents created a perimeter around the school. Robert studied the crowd with trained eyes, looking for anomalies, unusual behavior, anyone who didn't belong. From his intelligence training, he knew abductors often returned to observe the investigation, feeding on the chaos they'd created. He methodically scanned faces, looking for individuals displaying what professionals called inappropriate affect. People who seemed too calm, too interested, or who avoided eye contact with law enforcement. Detective Sarah Williams was coordinating with FBI agents near the command vehicle when Robert approached. "Detective Williams, I'm Robert Johnson, teacher at Riverside Elementary. I'd like to help with the investigation." "Sir, we appreciate the concern, but this is a federal investigation." "We have procedures, Detective," Robert interrupted, his voice carrying a weight that made her pause. "I have experience in locating missing persons. 12 years of it." Something in his tone made Detective Williams study his face more carefully. "What kind of experience?" "Military intelligence, human intelligence specialist. I've located high-value targets in hostile environments across 3 theaters of operation." The detective's expression shifted. "You're serious? 3 children were taken 90 minutes ago. In my experience, we have maybe 2 hours before they're moved to a secondary location. After that, the trail becomes exponentially more difficult to follow. Detective Williams looked toward the FBI command center, then back at Robert. What would you need? Access to the abduction site, witness statements, and any available surveillance footage. Also, I'll need to interview the children's families. Within 30 minutes, Robert had transformed from elementary school teacher to intelligence analyst. His movements became precise and purposeful as he examined the playground where the children had been taken. The north playground was adjacent to a parking area and bordered by a wooded area. Robert immediately understood why this location had been chosen. Multiple escape routes, limited surveillance coverage, and natural concealment. The abduction was here, he said, pointing to an area near the swing sets. Multiple witnesses saw a white van, but they focused on the vehicle rather than the individuals. Detective Williams handed him the witness statements. Robert read them with the systematic analysis he'd used for intelligence reports. 3 separate witnesses mentioned the van had work equipment in the back. That's specific enough to be accurate, general enough to suggest the witnesses weren't coached. Sometimes perpetrators plant false witnesses to misdirect investigations. These statements seem genuine. Robert paused, studying the playground layout. Detective, who reported the children missing. Their teacher, Mrs. Patterson. She noticed they hadn't returned from recess. How long between the end of recess and her report? About 15 minutes. She thought they were in the bathroom or getting water. Robert nodded grimly. 15 minutes was enough time to clear the immediate area and reach a secondary staging location. Professional planning. I need to interview the families, Robert said. Not for emotional support, for intelligence gathering. The Rodriguez family lived in a modest home 5 miles from the school. Robert approached the interview differently than the FBI agents had, where they focused on emotional support and general questions. He gathered operational intelligence. Mrs. Rodriguez, Robert said gently, I know this is difficult, but I need to ask specific questions about Emma's routine. Has anything changed in the past few weeks? New people in the neighborhood, service workers, anyone who might have observed her patterns? There was a man, Mrs. Rodriguez said slowly. Cable repair truck. He was in our neighborhood 3 times last week. Different days, but always around school time. Robert's pulse quickened. Surveillance. Pattern establishment. Can you describe the truck? White van. Had ladders on top and equipment in the back. The same description from the playground witnesses. Robert was building a profile. At the Thompson house, he gathered similar intelligence. Mrs. Thompson mentioned a utility worker who'd been checking power lines near the school for the past week. Same time frame, same demographic observation pattern. The Chen family provided the final piece. Mr. Chen, a security consultant, had noticed unusual vehicle patterns in the school zone. Someone was conducting surveillance, he told Robert. Different vehicles, but same pattern. Arrive before school dismissal. Leave after children were picked up. Robert now had a clear picture. This wasn't random. The abduction had been planned, with extensive surveillance and pattern recognition. Professional level planning suggested either criminal organization or individuals with tactical training. He returned to the command center with actionable intelligence. Detective Williams, we're dealing with a sophisticated operation. Multiple surveillance phases, professional execution and escape planning. This wasn't opportunistic, it was a planned operation. What does that mean for finding the children? It means we need to think like they think. They chose these 3 children specifically, conducted surveillance, and planned multiple escape routes. But that level of planning also creates vulnerabilities. Robert spread a map of the area on the command table. They needed a staging area within 30 minutes of the school, somewhere private enough to transfer the children to a different vehicle, but accessible enough for quick movement. His finger traced potential routes. Based on the surveillance patterns and escape timing, they're operating from a base within this radius. He drew a circle encompassing roughly 50 square miles. That's still a huge area, Detective Williams said. Not if we narrow it by their operational requirements. They need vehicle access, privacy, and storage capability. That eliminates residential areas, public spaces, and commercial districts with high traffic. Robert's analysis identified 12 potential locations, abandoned warehouses, rural properties, and industrial areas that met the operational criteria. Detective, We also know they used a white utility van for surveillance and abduction. If they're professionals, they've already switched to a different vehicle, but they still need the staging location. The FBI had been conducting a grid search with helicopters and ground teams. Robert suggested a different approach, tactical intelligence rather than broad searching. We position surveillance on these 12 locations simultaneously. Look for recently increased activity, unusual vehicle patterns, or new security measures. Professional operations leave intelligence signatures. Detective Williams coordinated with the FBI team leader. Within an hour, surveillance was established on all 12 target locations. At 6:47 p.m., 4 hours after the abduction, Surveillance Team Alpha reported unusual activity at an abandoned textile factory 15 miles north of the school. Multiple vehicles, recent tire tracks, and what appears to be temporary lighting inside the building. Came the radio report. Robert studied the factory layout on satellite imagery. Perfect operational base, vehicle access, multiple escape routes, and sound insulation. If I were planning this operation, I'd choose this location. The tactical approach required careful coordination. 3 children's lives depended on the rescue operation being executed perfectly. Robert's military experience had included coordinating with special operations teams for high-value target recovery. Detective, these individuals chose this location because it offers multiple escape routes. We need to control all possible exits before revealing our presence. The FBI tactical team surrounded the factory, while Robert and Detective Williams monitored from the command vehicle. Through thermal imaging, they confirmed multiple individuals inside the building, including 3 smaller figures who appeared to be the missing children. At 8:15 p.m., the FBI team executed the rescue operation. Robert's intelligence analysis had been accurate. 3 children were recovered safely, and 4 suspects were apprehended without incident. Emma Rodriguez, Marcus Thompson, and Sophia Chen were reunited with their families that evening. They were frightened but unharmed, having been held in a secure room inside the factory while their captors prepared for transportation to what investigators later learned would have been a human trafficking network. As Robert drove home that night, his phone buzzed with a text from Detective Williams. "Thank you. Your intelligence work saved those children's lives." But Robert was already thinking like a teacher again. Tomorrow, he'd be back in his classroom, reading stories and teaching math to 2nd graders. The intelligence officer would return to dormancy, filed away with other skills from a different life. The next morning, Robert arrived at Riverside Elementary at his usual time. His classroom looked exactly the same: colorful posters, student artwork, and Charlotte's Web still lying where he dropped it during Principal Martinez's announcement. His students filed in, chattering about playground games and weekend plans, unaware that their teacher had spent the previous day coordinating a federal rescue operation. "Good morning, class," Robert said, picking up the book from where it had fallen. "Yesterday we were reading about Charlotte and Wilbur. Today let's see what adventures they have next." As he opened to chapter 12, Robert reflected on the duality of his life. For 8 years, he'd been content teaching children, helping them discover the joy of learning and the power of imagination. But yesterday had reminded him that some skills never really disappear. They just wait quietly until they're needed. Principal Martinez stopped by his classroom during lunch break. "Robert, I heard about yesterday. I don't understand how, but I know you helped find those children. I just provided some perspective to the investigation." Robert replied, "Grading spelling tests. The detective called this morning. She said your intelligence analysis was crucial to the rescue." Robert looked up from the papers. "Principal Martinez, I'm a teacher. That's who I choose to be. Yesterday was unusual circumstances, but you have these incredible skills. I have skills that were necessary in a different time, for a different purpose. Here, my job is to teach children to read, to think critically, and to believe in themselves. Both matter, but this is what I choose." That afternoon, as Robert read Charlotte's Web to his 2nd graders, he thought about service, identity, and the different ways people protect what matters most. In the military, he'd served by gathering intelligence that kept soldiers safe. Now, he served by teaching children who would grow up to make the world better. His student Emma raised her hand. "Mr. Johnson, why did Charlotte help Wilbur?" "Because Emma," Sometimes we have special abilities that we can use to help others. Charlotte used her web spinning to save her friend. We all have gifts that we can use to protect the people we care about. The story of Charlotte and Wilbur continued, but Robert's mind was already planning tomorrow's lessons. Math games for teaching fractions, reading exercises for building vocabulary, and science experiments that would make learning exciting. Some people serve in uniform, gathering intelligence and tracking dangerous individuals. Others serve in classrooms, shaping young minds and building better futures. Both are necessary, both matter, and sometimes, when children's lives are in danger, those two forms of service merge, guided by the same fundamental purpose: protecting those who cannot protect themselves. This story was brought to you by Hidden Hero Stories. If you know someone whose service continues in unexpected ways, share their story in the comments and subscribe to honor those who never stop protecting others, whether in uniform or in classrooms.